All right, welcome to A Growing Concern. So I appreciate folks tuning in tonight. As I announced in the past, we're going to have Rod Steiner, who is with the Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. An acquaintance of mine asked me if I would be interested in having somebody come on and talk about this, and I have never talked about this before, and it's not something I've ever really made a full decision. You know, as I said earlier to Ron, killing people for killing people, it just seems kind of ironic. And but there are some people who maybe are that much of a danger to society, and we're going to go through all the pro and con on this tonight. But welcome to the program, Ron.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to be with you.
All right, I sure appreciate that you got a hold of me about this, and I think it was Rosemary, right? Rosemary that got this thing going. The death penalty we'll just start off. It's a state by state.
It is. It's a states' rights issue. At the present time, there's 31 states that still have a death penalty, including Oregon. Mm-hmm. Although we don't use it very much, we have it. We have it on the books. Mm-hmm. And there's been several states that have repealed their death penalty in recent years: New York, New Jersey, New Mexico, Connecticut, Illinois, and more recently Maryland. So the trend is moving toward getting rid of it, but it still exists, and we can get into a lot of the things that come up about it.
Sure. Well, there's so many different ways to go, but why did these states get rid of it? Was it because of organizations such as yourself, or the Congress themselves in their state capital, or a mixture?
Well, there's several states that have not had it for an awful long time. Michigan, the first thing they did when they became a state in 1849. Got rid of the death penalty at that point. There's been several states. They're mostly in New England, across the top of the Midwest, Minnesota, mm-hmm. Wisconsin, states like that. So there's several states that haven't. And then the more recent ones, they're just finding so many flaws with the death penalty, so much bias in its administration, so much cost to maintain a death penalty, and they find that it's not a deterrent. So organizations like ours try to inform people about mm-hmm. the death penalty and the issues that surround it.
From what you were mentioning there, you said a lot of those states that you mentioned were all Great Lakes states. And so is it kind of in chunks in this country, where maybe one area is really for it and other areas are against it? Is it demographically?
I think probably in the early instances it was demographically. Across the Midwest, the top of the Midwest, then down to New England states. There's only one New England state that still has it. That's been New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. New Hampshire still has it. Where it's solid and continues to be used is in the South. Most of the southern states still have it.
Like Texas.
Texas is probably the leading proponent of it, mm-hmm. but there's several other states that still practice it. But the number of states that do use the death penalty are shrinking, and we have some numbers that we can share with you as we go along. But fewer and fewer states are doing it. You get rid of it through different means in different states. Oregon is uniquely only one of 3 states that it requires a vote of the people, because it's in our Constitution.
It makes it difficult.
California is like that. Florida is like that. Every place else, they can get rid of the death penalty in the legislature. So it's a little bit different here because we have a several-step process, mm-hmm. and a lot more people get to voice how they feel about it.
So has it ever been done by the initiative process?
It's been tried here. Actually, Oregon has a back and forth situation with the death penalty. We've had it and we didn't have it, and we'd had it and we didn't have it. It was repealed first time in 1914, and then 10 years later they brought it back. Mm-hmm. It was repealed in 1964, and they brought it back in 1984. So we've had it on and off. We've had it since '84 here. But we haven't used it very much. There's only been 2 executions in Oregon in the last 53 years.
Wasn't one of them you requested it?
Both of them. Both of them volunteered. They found their life in prison for the rest of their lives to be untenable. They didn't want to do it. So they said, no more appeals, take me out.
After a certain point.
1996 and 1997.
Yeah. Some of those appeals are mandatory, I think, but not all of them.
Oregon has a very thorough series of appeals. It's 10 steps that goes through the various courts and then ends up in the federal court for the last 3. But there's an opportunity to appeal those. Not very many people get exonerated and found to be innocent, but across the country there have been quite a few.
That was going to be my next point. I mean, as we get, science gets better and better, the DNA and all the different ways that they have of backing up whether you're guilty or innocent. There's even a project, I forget the name of the project now, that has gotten quite a few people released, not necessarily from the death penalty, but across the board. And as that science keeps getting better and better, and more people are exonerated, it seems to me a while back one of the governors of a state, it's exactly why he did that.
Yeah.
I forget what state that was.
Well, you've touched on a couple of things there. The Innocence Project is who I think you're thinking about.
Really easy to
Most states and a lot of major cities have an Innocence Project. Oregon, excuse me, Oregon just got the Innocence Project started here a couple of years ago.
So that's a government project then?
No, it's an independent organization,
okay.
funded in its various ways, but they're into a lot of different cases, not necessarily death cases, but they have a lot of different cases, and they've had lots of success across the country. The other issue that comes up on this is the fact that so many in these appeals, they're finding so many reasons that people did not get a fair trial. And then they go back and forth in various hearings and legislative hearings and all, and find that there were mistakes made. Unfortunately, the mistakes are made to a very specific group of people. In the United States, since 1976, the Supreme Court got rid of the death penalty in 1972. Said it violated the 8th Amendment as under the cruel and unusual punishment aspects. And what they demanded was those states that had a death penalty, that wanted to keep a death penalty, had to change their protocol in the way they executed people. We've gone from hanging to the gas chamber to electric chair to now lethal injections.
They still haven't gotten it right.
Haven't gotten it right. So in 1972, when the Supreme Court says get rid of the death penalty, states started to change their protocols and made it conform to the existence of the rules. At that time, Oregon didn't have the death penalty because that was the period from 64 to 84 that they had gotten rid of it. But when they did vote it back in, they had to change their protocol. And who do you think they followed?
Texas.
Texas. You're right. You're right.
Well, go with the best, right?
They're the most experienced for sure.
Right.
So anyhow, when we have these conversations, Jim, we like to. Our job as Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty is to provoke the conversation. Everybody is entitled to their own point of view, but everybody is not entitled to their own set of facts. So a lot of people don't know a lot about the death penalty, don't think about it since we don't have it here. They don't bother to think about it. It's not on the front pages of the newspaper every day. It's not on television every day. But when it comes up, they generally will voice an opinion, but the depth of their knowledge that that opinion is based on is quite shallow. Many times it's a gut reaction, a reaction that many of us feel the same way when we hear of heinous crimes, violent murders. We get in our gut,
Yeah.
We know that's wrong, that's a terrible thing to be doing, and something has to be done about it. But when you look at the processes that people have to go through in terms of administering the death penalty, it's very complex, and people need to know the facts, the issues about it, and then make a decision. I mean, everybody can say. And in Oregon, we're going to have that opportunity in a few short years when people can vote on it. But if they go to the polls knowing what it's all about, that's the best way to do it. If they go to the polls not knowing about it, it's not a very good way to do it.
So this has never come up to a vote in Portland, Oregon yet?
No, it hasn't come up for a vote yet. Well, not in recent history. It came up in 1984 when they brought it back, and 64 when they took it out.
But since then, it's been pretty much, has it been in that period of time that only 2 people have been executed?
from the time they brought it back in 1984.
That's as compared
30-some years.
as compared
Yeah.
to Texas, which they'll do that in a month, probably,
Yeah.
or something like that. Well, I don't know. That might be off the subject, but a lot of it is any of this have to do with the private prisons?
No, not really. Private prisons, another issue, which we could do a whole show on
We
that.
might do that because I know there's a national protest and all kinds of things going on around the prisons right now.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience from it. When I lived in New Mexico, they had private prisons. They got private prisons into the system. Private prisons, because they are privately oriented, they have less staff, less training for the people. They pay them less than Department of Correction people do here. Consequently, you set up a lot of opportunities for more violence within the prison. It's not a safe environment. There's very little rehabilitation that goes on. There's very little programming that helps people change their lives so that when they do get out of prison, they can have a better chance.
Yeah.
So private prisons are terrible. They're not working very well. It's becoming very costly, not so much on the inside, but on the outside, because government services have to take care of all those problems when those people get out, and then they have to go back in. So that's a big problem.
I was curious, do private prisons, do they execute people?
No. No,
So they're not allowed to do that?
Still the responsibility of the state to carry out executions.
I'm glad to hear that. So, yeah, I've had a couple notes here, but I've totally lost track of where I was going to go next. This is all really interesting to me, that all these different facts. Like you said, I was one of those ignorant people you talked about. To me, the whole issue was, do we really want this person back out on the street ever? If he's got a lifetime in jail, like those two people you said just decided they want to just cash in. Serial killers and people that kill children. There's just really no reason they should still be alive, and that's about as deep as I went. And I didn't really get any further into that, other than the fact that it just seems like prosecution these days, they just want to get somebody for it, and so there's a lot of times that people are put away on really a smattering of evidence.
Yeah. Well,
and that may be not necessarily very often in the capital crime cases, but across the board it is, and that needs to be reckoned with if people are going to be given the death penalty. And as you say, it's a real difficult thing to
it is a difficult thing, and prosecutors have a job to do, and the people who defend them, the defense lawyers, have a job to do. So when we get into these things, the first thing that you want to look at is justice being served. Is the administration of this done well? And our gut reaction is sometimes they did a terrible, terrible thing, and something has to be done. And so the reaction a lot of people have, kill them, do the same thing, an eye for an eye kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the way the system works. So if we look at the administration of the death penalty, you start off with the fact that it is very unique to have a death sentence. We have a whole country, 31 states have the death penalty, and 19 of them do not at this point in time. So right away, is that equal justice? Because a crime committed in one state, say in North Dakota, you don't get the death penalty. If it was done 20 miles south in South Dakota, you have a chance to get the death penalty. Is that justice? Is that fair? Is that even? Another thing is, so the justice is based on place in one place. And the second aspect is justice is administered unfairly and biasly in terms of race. Of all the people that get the death penalty, a disproportionate number or percentage of them are, first of all poor, and number two, they're people of color. It's interesting, the first time I ever got really seriously thinking about this is I heard Sister Helen Prejean, who's the author of Dead Man Walking, speaking, and she said a rhetorical question: what percentage of the people who are convicted, tried and convicted of aggravated murder get a death sentence? And the answer to that is less than 2%. Same kind of crimes, but only 2% get the death penalty, less than 2%. And they're all poor, and most of the majority of them are people of color. So that starts off about the fairness aspect. And justice should be even-handed and fair. So race and place are the two issues that you have to look at when you talk about justice being served.
Well, as far as justice being served, you said it was at 31 as opposed and 19. 31 states have it and 19 don't.
Right.
Are the rules that for implementing the death penalty different from one state to the next, as well as the fact that you can kill somebody in one state and make the death penalty and not in another, but the rules are different within those states that it is?
A little bit different, but most every state that is practicing the death penalty is doing it by lethal injection at this point. But that has huge, big problems. First of all, the chemicals that are used for lethal injection are primarily made in Europe. In Europe, none of the European countries have a death penalty. So they are not shipping any chemicals here to carry out death sentences. So states that want to do that, they're going to compounding pharmacies, people that are not in the business of making the kind of chemicals that are necessary. And they're hiding the fact. In fact, Oklahoma,
that was the one.
Oklahoma had an execution coming up. They didn't have the chemicals that were necessary. They got some cash money, took it across to Arkansas, and got in the dark of night. Nobody knew what was going on, and it's not at all transparent. And that's not the way our justice system is supposed to work.
Is that the one that was so terribly botched?
No, that wasn't that one, but that's another example of the difficulty with that. So some of the states are saying, well, if we can't get the lethal injection, let's go back to the electric chair. Or if we can't get the chemicals for the lethal injection, let's use the firing squad like they did in Utah. Mm-hmm. The last exexecution in Utah was with the firing squad.
There's no chance for error on that one.
No chance for error, but we got some problems with that too.
Right. Well, I think the French had the best idea, but as far as effectuating that, but it's pretty gruesome. But also, besides the fact that of the method of killing, what are all the states have different criteria to why they would implement it? Does it have to be a multiple slaying, and maybe another state it's not, or are those pretty much the same?
No, Jim, that's a great question. Because what it is people get tried and convicted, and under certain circumstances are convicted of aggravated murder. So statutorily, this legislature can say you get a death sentence because an aggravator would be killing a police officer, killing a pregnant woman, killing two people in the same offense, killing somebody while another felony is taking place, like killing somebody in a robbery.
Right,
so
robbery,
each state has a set of aggravators. Oregon has something like 22 aggravators.
Wow.
More than most states. So consequently, there may have the opportunity that there's more chances that district attorneys and prosecutors would go for a death penalty because of the aggravating circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I'm a real fan of the program Law and Order, and there's been a few different programs that were revolving around implementing the death penalty. And of course, that's TV, I realize, but there's a lot of it seems to be based in law, and a lot of folks have got the death penalty. And there was one time when Canada would not extradite because if they were going to do that.
Yeah.
Now, did we have situations like that in other countries?
Sure. It goes on here. And in Oregon, we have people that flee to Mexico, and the Mexican people, because they don't have a death penalty, if they know there's a death sentence coming up, they're not going to ship them back here. Uh-huh. So we're unique. We're with a group of countries that we accuse of violation of human rights big time around the world. China, Iraq, Iran,
North Korea,
Saudi Arabia, North Korea, and the United States. We accuse them of violations of human rights all the time, but we are a part of that because we're a country that also has a death penalty.
We also have 2 million people in prison
Yeah,
That's
well,
compared.
that's another that's another hour-long show.
Yeah, that definitely is. So we got 2 of them so far.
Yeah.
Huh? All right. Well, let's see. We have a list here, and it's always good to come at it from the other side and say, why people feel that a death penalty is necessary. We actually covered some of them. Typically, sometimes I'll have a list, but even without the list, when we have a casual conversation, most of those points come up. But I think this next one, I do not want to pay to keep him in prison with the three hots and a cot. TV and all that for the rest of their life. They don't want them to be comfortable. I don't know. I don't consider being in prison comfortable, but people do become institutionalized. So it is a way of life for some people.
It is,
and people don't want that.
and it's understandable that
Sure.
people would find that a problem. But here's a case where the depth of knowledge is quite shallow. If you look at the facts, Oregon has the Department of Corrections keeps a tally on how much it costs per day to keep people in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So the most recent figure is like $87.20 a day. So if you start to do the math and multiply that $87 times 365 days times the 34 people that are on death row, it cost us a little over $1 million for the incarceration of the 30 people on Oregon's death row.
So
That's a lot of money.
That 87.20 is just for death row then.
Well, no, for the whole system.
Oh, okay.
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 It might actually be a little bit higher for death row. But if you look at the cost of having the death penalty with all the appeals, all the lawyering that has to go on, we spend an estimated, and this is a pretty solid estimate because most of the figures are authenticated through the government, we are spending in excess of $28 million every year to maintain the death penalty. A death penalty we don't bother to use very often, only 2 times in 53 years.
So you're talking specifically Oregon and $28 million.
Yes, Oregon, $28 million. So compare that to the little over, it's I think $1,031,000 a year. For what we spend in 1 year, we could incarcerate those people for over 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't make any sense. And when people say, I don't want to pay for that guy the rest of his life, that's the cheap way out. Mm-hmm. The expensive way is having the death penalty.
I've heard that, and I didn't understand. It didn't seem to make sense to me that that would be more expensive. But then you can fight it for what, 20-something years?
Well, we have people on the road that are in their 23rd, 24th year, yeah. And we have a very high rate of cases that have been overturned and then sent back to the lower court on one of these appeals processes. So Randy Guzik is a very good example. He's a young man at 19 years old with another fellow. They committed a double murder in Deschutes County. Guzik, they both got tried, convicted. Guzik gets the death penalty. I'm not sure what happened to his accomplice in that crime. But he's been tried and 4 times and been overturned. And they keep going back to try it all over again. A death penalty is more expensive than a non-death case because it's really 2 trials. One for guilt and innocence and one for sentencing. So in the case of Randy Guzik, we've probably spent $3 or $4 million to try and do something with this guy. And it's still not resolved. And some of the witnesses, families of the aggrieved family, or relatives of the people who were murdered, have decided, I can't go back and do that over and over and over again like that. And they've quit coming to the trials. So getting those people to come and testify or even watch them, what it does for those people, it rips open their hearts again, rips open those wounds again that they felt before. And it's senseless. It's senseless. If we had the alternative, and that's what Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty advocate for, life without the possibility of parole gives plenty of punishment, keeps the people safe, the Department of Corrections knows how to protect people, and it's over with. We have appeals, but not nearly as many, and we save an awful lot of money. The other part of the alternative is, what do you do with those savings? We suggest you put them into things that really help deter crime. Rehabilitation for the addicted, better mental health services, intervention into abusive households, better early childhood education, lots of different ways, programs that are all underfunded in this state, but we tend to throw away $28 million a year to keep the death penalty, to show that we're tough on crime. Doesn't make any sense.
We'll never let it be said that the government ever makes sense, especially a government that has a lot of money. And
We don't.
yeah, it just seems to me that they're basically just throwing these people away. If you got life without parole, you're out on the death penalty, people are just figuring that there's no way they could ever be a decent citizen again.
Yeah, well, let me share another part of this whole thing. And I can understand people's point of view when they say they did a terrible thing. Something has to be justified. We have to get retribution. We have to get revenge for those people. But in Oregon, I mentioned we had 34 people on the row. We also have 132 people in the prison, most all of them are at OSP in Salem, that have life without the possibility of parole. They have no chance for parole. They're not going anywhere. These people are in a club. They call it the Lifers Club. And it's amazing what they do. They are older, they're a little more mature. They do community service within the prison. They keep the young bucks under control a little bit.
Try to.
Yeah. They do community service. They sponsor an organization called Angels in the Outfield. It's an organization for children of incarcerated parents. They build a playground on the prison grounds so that when they come to visit their parents, they get a place to go out and play. Their parents can go out and play with them. The guys in the Lifers Club have found a way to make the best out of a bad situation by helping other people.
Making lemonade.
and then on top of that, there's another 600 people convicted of murder, more than 600 convicted of murder, who get life with the possibility of parole. So when you add up all those figures, you got about 700 or 800 people who are convicted of murder, same crime, murder.
First degree murder?
Murder.
Murder, period.
They've all gotten convicted of murder. Okay, so they all committed a murder. So when people say, well, we'll save the death penalty for the worst of the worst. If you are a family member who has lost a loved one to murder, that's the worst.
It's the worst.
Every murder is terrible. But the justice system is rigged so that the people who are poor do not have good defense, do not have a good background in many cases, are unable to help defend themselves, are the ones that get the death penalty.
Well, if they have a appointed lawyer, that lawyer's probably got however many X amount of cases on his desk. How much time can he spend?
Yeah, well, that's one good thing about Oregon's death penalty is we have wonderful defense lawyers who are defending these people on the row. Wonderful people who are very capable. But they're committed to doing their job to defend these people. If they were in another kind of defense law, like defending drunk drivers, rich people who get drunk and get, they would probably be making 3 and 4 times more an hour than they're making for those cases, because they're committed to help these guys.
Like that fellow that got that kid off because he was rich and he wasn't trained to be a good guy. Forget what they called that, but it was pretty funny. Well, there's also one here that I think is really an important one here. Is the death penalty is needed for prosecutors to secure confessions. So the prosecutors need this to be able to plea people down. It's a big sword over their head. I don't know if I feel really good about that one.
Well, that's a point that I think from a lot of aspects is correct.
Yeah.
It saves money if they can get somebody to say, we're going to pursue the death penalty for you. And if you don't admit to doing this crime, we're going to just go all the way and you're going to die. And so some people confess to that. So they do save some money because they don't have a death case and they go on and they have less appeals. But the other part of this is some people commit or confess to crimes they didn't really commit.
That's just what I was going to ask.
And that's basically because, number one, many of them don't have the mental capacity to stand up to that. If they have some kind of infirmity, disability in terms of mental disabilities, they'll sometimes confess because they're used to trying to please authority. I'll give you a case. Last year, in 2015, there's a young man named Leon Henry in North Carolina. He and his cousin were tried and convicted of the murder of a young girl. She was about 9 years old. They were neighbor kids. And they were picked up and taken to the police station, and they were investigated, quizzed by the police in a room by themselves without a lawyer, without being able to call their parents or anything, until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And they wrote out confessions and had these guys sign them. And these guys were not bright people. So they end up saying they signed this thing, and the kids, Leon says, "Can we go home now?" That's how little he knew about the process. Anyhow, they get convicted, they go to prison. Well, a young lawyer got after their case after many years. I think they were in prison like 30 years. And they were found to be innocent because they found some DNA for another guy who was already in prison who did the crime. So they were part of the 156 people across the country who have been exonerated. But that's a good case of the lawyers pressuring and pressuring and pressuring to get a conviction, and that's what happens in that case. There's a case here in Oregon that happened a little over 10 years ago in Clackamas County. And this woman who's associated with our organization, it was her mother and her stepfather. And she tells the story that the prosecutors were screaming at them to go for the death penalty. And she didn't want to do that. She didn't want to do that at all. But that's the kind of pressure they sometimes put on family members to help do that. Because family members are very important in the court system. Whether you're for it or against it, they have a lot to say about it. But that's what happens many times when the prosecutors are going for the death penalty and saying that we need it. In other states, like in New Jersey, when they repealed the death penalty, a year later, the head prosecutor for the state of New Jersey did an article in the newspaper, in the Trenton newspaper, that said we are still getting the top highest level of convictions for the maximum sentences without the death penalty. So it doesn't make that much difference. Other states who don't have a death penalty, their prosecutors are successful to get the maximum sentencing.
I don't see how that is a deterrent myself. It didn't seem to me that the death penalty would be deterrent. Maybe in a what do they call it, first degree, when you're planning it out ahead of time, you may think about it. But so many murders are not planned out ahead of time.
Yeah,
I would think that they're
most,
heat of the moment, and you just do it and that's it.
That's it. If somebody's angry, full of drugs, full of alcohol, full of hate, they're going to do stuff like that. An interesting thing, if people get into the murder statistics, most of the murders that take place in this country are people who know each other. Partners, former lovers, so on and so forth. It's not just walking down the street and somebody gets shot.
Just pop them, yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly people who are in violent relationships in the first place that end up with murder.
That's an important statistic. I had never really thought about that.
The other thing to verify that, if you look at the FBI statistics, the states without death penalties have a lower murder rate than the states with the death penalty. And then in terms of deterrent, there's been lots of studies on both sides of that issue, but the National Research Council, and these are the people who do the research for the National Academy of Medicine, Science, and Engineering, most respected research authority in the country. 2 years ago, they did a study, and they said there is no evidence that the death penalty deters or does not deter crime. So if somebody says it deters crime, there's no evidence to that. And we on the other side can't say it doesn't deter crime. So it's a neutral factor.
It's a hard one to prove. So, well, I know that you brought along a little 4-minute clip, and let's give the folks a minute or so to get that organized, and we'll play this little clip. It's some animated piece, right?
Yeah, it's an animated piece. It's done by an outfit, Sundog Productions in London, And the people in Europe are very interested in what we're doing over here, and they would like to help us get rid of the death penalty because none of the European Union countries have it. And even though Britain's leaving the EU, they don't want us to do. So these people over there made this, and it talks about some things that people need to pay attention to in terms of the means of executions, and also the cost that's involved in that. So whenever your people are ready,
I think they might be ready. We'll put that up right now.
A really quick and occasionally bloody look at the death penalty.
Got a minute? Well, I've only got 2 or 3, so let's get started.
History.
And boy, what a history!
Backbreaking, blood eagle boiling, buried alive, burning, cooking, crucifixion, crushing and disembowelment, slaying, chipping and impalement, self-slicing and suffocation. Any other horrible way that a person could die.
Brutal! But it's not all ancient history. We still have beheadings and stonings in Saudi Arabia, folks strung up from cranes in Iran, mass executions in China, and the occasional death by anti-aircraft gun in North Korea.
Geography.
140 countries around the world have ended it altogether, including all Western democracies. All Western democracies except the United States. Not only one of the top 5 executing nations in the world, the only Western democracy on the planet still knocking off its own people. Even here, the death penalty has been on the decline in recent years. 34 states either have no death penalty or haven't carried one out in over 5 years. But there are just 15 counties responsible for the majority of executions carried out since '76.
Cost.
But at least it's cheaper to execute someone than to lock them up for life. Am I right? Well, the average death penalty case in Texas costs taxpayers around $3 million, more than it costs to lock someone up at a highest security prison there for 120 years. And if you count the number of sentences that are actually carried out, looking at an estimated $20 million nationally for every single execution. That's like locking someone up in a supermax for 1,000 years.
Ways to die.
The Constitution forbids cruel and unusual punishment, which has led most states to switch from the electric chair to lethal injection. Ah, lethal injection.
It's modern, modern and humane.
Except doctors aren't allowed to administer the execution drugs, and pharmaceutical companies want nothing to do with them. So it's become really hard to get the right drugs, which has led to more and more botched executions. How bad are the drugs? Virtually all of the states that use them to kill people won't let you use the same combination of drugs to euthanize an animal, because it's too cruel. Some states are actually going back to old methods, like the firing squad. I'm looking at you, Utah. Hey, Oklahoma. Oh, what a beautiful gas chamber. The electric chair. Virginia, what?
Innocence.
A conservative estimate is that at least 4% of all death row inmates are innocent, and probably more. That means there are well over 100 innocent people right now sitting on death row. Must suck to be them.
Fairness.
Let's just say you're better off rich and guilty than poor and innocent, as it's pretty much a certainty that if you're on death row, you couldn't afford your own attorney. Some people on death row right now had lawyers who were drunk or actually fell asleep during their trial.
Deterrence.
Over the last 14 years, states with the death penalty have had murder rates on average 34% higher than states without the death penalty.
And there you have it. Everything you didn't know you wanted to know about the death penalty.
It looks like my time is up. Now you can go use those facts.
All right, well, that was a lot different than I expected. But we'll get to the phones in a couple minutes because I'm hoping folks will want to call up and give some comments on this. But how is the European Union, how do their statistics for murder and all that?
Oh, the European countries all have much, much lower murder rates than we do in the United States. Now, part of that is part of the fact that we have so many guns here. Most of those countries do not have guns the way we have guns here. And I'm not against people having guns, but the kind of guns that are there. So that's one of the factors. So in Sweden, as an example, they have a mass murderer in Sweden that was convicted, and they got 22 years as a sentence. And the people are satisfied with that because their system is built on rehabilitation. Germany has a system built on rehabilitation, so they're not fearful of these people coming out and doing crimes again. They help them get turned around. Now, there are some people who are psychopaths that are never going to get out, and they shouldn't get out because they're dangerous. But the people in corrections know what they're doing, and given the opportunity, they can help these people. Just like the Lifers Club, they get older, they have some chance to reflect on their mistakes. Some of them are recovering from terrible childhood experiences, and they grew up in a life of violence from the beginning. And it takes time to work through that. But the European system is very different than us. It's been on 60 Minutes and other national shows several times of late. Yeah.
Well, I've seen things, I think it was on OPB, about prisoners and on horses, where they're training horses, and also, what was that, pit bulls and prisoners or something, where they're finding ways to give these folks that obviously had a bad childhood or had issues, and to bring them back into connection with life, which is really what it's going to take, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And I'm that Lifers Club that you talked about. That's a step in that direction as well. Well, see, we got about 16 minutes. We can open up these phones if folks want to call up. Sometimes we get calls, sometimes we don't, and it'd be interesting to have any comments. And we'll just go ahead with a couple more of these points here. What you hear a lot probably is. I'm going to skip one and go, the Bible says it is okay an eye for an eye. This is considered a Christian nation. It isn't really, but it is considered that by a lot of people, and that is the Old Testament, not the New Testament as well. So when someone says that, I'm sure that you might get that occasionally.
Yeah, we get that quite often.
Yeah.
And there's a distinction between justice and revenge or retribution.
You would hope.
An eye for an eye is all about retribution and revenge. That quote, if you look at that quote in depth, it just is part of it. It was originally designed to temper people's reaction to terrible things. Like if somebody steals a neighbor's goat, you don't burn down his house.
You steal his goat or something.
Yeah, it's not equal, and we don't do that here. I mean, we don't rape the rapist, or we don't set on fire the arsonist. It's only the death penalty that goes for this. But anyhow, the Bible is the source of a lot of people's feeling that God ordains the death penalty to be okay. Evidence of that in this country is the South has become, the Bible Belt has become the death belt. The only states that presently are executing people are all in the South. There's only 6 states out of the 31 states that have the death penalty. Only 6 states had executions last year. This year, there's liable to be only 5 states. They're all in the South. And a lot of those people who support that are getting that from the Bible. A lot of the evangelical people, and I'm not saying evangelical people are bad, but they believe seriously taking the Bible literally. The Association of Evangelical Churches used to have a position in favor of the death penalty. Just this past year, they changed their policy, and they have a resolution now that they are neutral on the death penalty. And that's because so many conservatives are starting to have serious questions about the death penalty. Its fairness, its cost, the mistakes that are made, the fact that innocent people are being incarcerated and sometimes executed. So a lot of people, they go to the Bible thinking they can get justification that God ordained this, but most of that's coming from the Old Testament. In Oregon, we have the support virtually of all the rabbis in Oregon who say that the Jewish system is set up that it's almost impossible to have an execution. Israel has only had one since its founding in 1948, has only had one execution in a Jewish country. So the Old Testament, the way it is interpreted, is giving some of these Bible readers the opportunity to say that God's will is to have an execution. If you look at the Old Testament, Cain kills Abel. Moses had a murder. David had a murder. And what happened to those people? Did they get executed? No, they got banished.
Banished.
They got separated from the people.
Sure.
So a lot of these people, they think they know the Bible, but some people, you know, they think Joan of Arc was Noah's wife.
I think I've seen a flash go on a couple times. I want to get back to that one here. Do we have a phone call?
You do. Thank you, Jim, for the program.
All right. Hey, you're welcome. I was really looking forward to this myself.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and I thank your guest for taking the time to explore this in depth. And I had no idea Joan of Arc was Moses' wife, but hey, you learn something new every day. So anyway, I would like your guest's opinion on those prisoners, those people who have been incarcerated and are not returnable to society. They've become institutionalized to such a point that they are just unfit for return. And regardless of whatever crime they've committed, a lot of people get let out of a prison for seemingly minor offenses, only to create further mayhem and keep returning back. And I thank you so much for this topic and your guest's views on this. And thank you for the program, and thank your crew.
All right. Thank you.
That's a good question.
It is a good question, and I was thinking, well, he said that do they screen people that might, for fear they might be institutionalized? And hope they get on top of that one there. Then if they're institutionalized, then they're going to go out and just do it again. So they're just letting someone loose to create another crime, and then they'll come back.
Okay.
That's not fair to society.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, if we're talking about the death penalty, that's one set of people that we know are convicted of murder.
Right.
We're not positive they're innocent or guilty, or they're guilty, but they've been convicted of murder. Those people have the option in Oregon to get a death sentence, a life without parole, or life with parole. So after 25 or 30 years, I forget which it is, but anyhow, they have to go to the parole board to get out. The parole board in Oregon doesn't let too many people out. The people in the Department of Correction and their counselors and their doctors and their psychiatrists know full well who are the psychopaths. And those people generally are not going to get out. They're not going to get out. Mm-hmm. People have problems living with other people. They shouldn't get out. There's a thing that we need to pay attention to and provide punishment, but we don't have to do it to excess. At the same time, we have to keep the people safe, the citizens of this country safe. We also have to keep the other inmates safe and the people who are staff people in the prison safe. So people who are unmanageable, who have major mental problems, and that's usually the case, they're not going to get out. Now, some people do get out, some people reoffend. Part of that, the recidivism rate in every state is determined to some degree for how well the services there are for people who are incarcerated and then let out. The reentry programs in Oregon are improving, and they're improving based on some things that the Oregon legislature started 4 years ago. It's called the Justice Reinvestment Act. And originally they allocated $11 million, gave them to each of the counties, gave money to each of the counties, and asked them to work on programs that would help people who got out of prison, help them with services, help them with addiction, rehabilitation with addiction, help them find jobs and things of that nature. It started to work, and the next time around, the legislature gave them $28 million. And they're having great success. Multnomah County is one of the sterling examples of great success they're having with this Justice Reinvestment Act. And what we're talking about, and it relates to the gentleman's question when he says some people shouldn't get out, the people know that, but the people who are getting out need to get services. In past years, and we have a friend that this happened to. He had served a lot of time in prison, in and out several times. Was pretty much rehabilitated. He had addictions. He got out of prison, and he had a bus ticket and a set of sweats and $50. What's he going to do? generally they'll go back to the neighborhoods that they came from, they hook up with their old friends again, and then they get into trouble, right? So the recidivism rates in every state has a lot to do with the kind of services that are available. I moved here from New Mexico several years ago, and I was working as a volunteer in a program called the Dismiss House, which was a program for incarcerated people to help them get on their feet. The recidivism rate was 70% in New Mexico. People who reoffended got out of prison and then went back. When you went through the program where you got the kind of support that the Dismiss House provided was 7%. So it all has to do, and the gentleman's question is a good one, and there is a lot of fact to the fact that we need to be careful about who does get out. But I think the people in corrections have a pretty good handle on how to handle that.
Well, that 7 as opposed to 70% might have something to do with the percentage of institutionalized.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would think that might have something to do with it. Well, we're looking at a little over 6 minutes here, and we've got a couple lists here. We actually talked about it being a deterrent, but I think one of the most important things. We do have another call. We'll get the next caller. Caller, you're on the air. Well, usually it's the first one. First one that's bumpy here. Caller, you're on the air. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hello. Can you hear us?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you.
All right, we can hear you fine. We got a question. You have a question or comment?
I do. Thank you so much. Well, first I just wanted to say thank you so much for the program.
You're welcome.
Stumbled upon it and have thought it's been fantastic and really informative. My question, I guess, is what can we do as a society, as a concerned member of our community? What are some specific things we can do to change the legislation? Because I'm concerned and I am against the death penalty, but I feel a little helpless.
All right. Well, thank you for that comment and question. I think that kind of cuts right to the heart of the whole thing, doesn't it?
I love this lady. Thank you. That's the best. That's the best question we could have had. That's what our job is. Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and we invite all of your viewers to pay attention to us, join with us. We're a nonprofit organization. We have no staff. We are all volunteers, and our job today is education. How do we educate people on the facts and issues that surround the death penalty? We're spending too much money. We have a chance of making mistakes. There are several things that are wrong with it. So what we try and do, encourage people, is to talk about, think about, learn about the death penalty, and then start to do things like get in touch with your legislator. We are in the process of polling the legislature right now, but call your legislator and say, I have concerns about our death penalty. Why do we have a death penalty? What's your position on it? How do you support it? Arm yourselves with facts. You can go to our website. Can I give them the information about our website?
Oh, it's been up there before. There it is.
There's our website on the screen, www.oadp.org. There's lots of information about it. We have lots of events. During October, I think we have like 9 or 10 events. Next Monday night in Salem. We're going to have a session at the Senior Center where Frank Thompson, the former superintendent of the prison, who oversaw the 2 executions in 1996 and 1997, is going to be the speaker. Frank Thompson, as soon as he retired, came to work with us. He's on our board of directors. He's very much against the death penalty for the basic reason he had to do that. He had to train his staff how to take somebody's life, and he knows that it's very, very harmful. There's been studies done. Portland State University 2 years ago did a study that estimated that 25% of the people who work in corrections have some form of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, prone to alcoholism, problems with that. There's lots of stress, and when you're asked to take part in taking somebody's life, this is a grave thing. So thank you very much, ma'am, for your question, and we would hope that people will see this and get on our website, call us up. Our phone number's on there. We usually will return calls immediately if we're not at hand to answer your questions. But get involved in your community. Have church groups meet together, meet in libraries, take it into the schools, whatever. Education is the thing, because if enough people understand the facts, it's a very difficult system to defend the death penalty.
You know, while you were speaking there, it struck me that what you were saying about these folks that are having issues with this, depression and all that, well, you could have been talking about soldiers. You know, with their PTSD.
Absolutely.
And what, 6 or whatever, 22 suicides a day of our soldiers, and the folks that you were talking about there too, I'm sure they have issues too, and it's all visiting death upon other people.
Yep, yep.
Whether
For
you're
sure.
kicking a door in or you're dropping a drone bomb on a wedding, or however it comes down, or you're executing somebody. You know, the victims had families, but usually the person you're executing does too. And we're down to less than 2 minutes, and just one quick one here, closure. You know, you got about, less than a minute to talk about closure.
Well,
Does it really create closure?
This is
Statistically.
there are people who are family members and loved ones of people who have lost their lives to murder are split on this. Some people are for it, some people are against it. I was on the board of directors of an organization called Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation. You can go to their website as well, mvfr.org. And most of those people find that there is no closure. Taking another person's life is just another act of violence. Taking another person's life will not bring their loved one back, will not make them forget their loved one, will not cure the hurt that they have. What really hurts is when they keep going back to trial after trial after trial after trial. Let's get it over with. Let's reconcile. Murder Victim Family for Reconciliation means move on with your lives. Abigail, one of our board members from Silverton, said, not only did that guy kill my daughter, he is killing me. And until she was able to move on, reconcile, and forgive that man, did she find her closure. There is no closure by killing somebody else.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the program, Ron. This has been education for a couple of viewers and me as well. And you being on here and everything you had to say really made it clear to me why the name of the group is the Alternatives to the Death Penalty rather than Oregonians Against It. You know, being against it doesn't necessarily provide any direction to go in. And you provided a lot of directions and a lot of reasons for it. And I want to thank the crew as well and the 2 callers.